They told us that there was only one virus, the wildfire infection, the single spark that consumed the world and turned the dead into hunters of the living. Every book, every documentary, and every fan theory has always focused on that one terrifying truth. But what if I told you that The Walking Dead was hiding something much darker? What if the wildfire virus was never truly alone? Buried beneath the chaos of reanimation, hidden between episodes and scattered in small details, there are signs of something else. A second virus, one that never received a name, one that never became the face of the apocalypse, but still carved its way through society in silence. Unlike the wildfire, this infection did not bring people back from the dead. It simply killed them, quickly, quietly, and in such overwhelming numbers that hospitals could not cope. And when those deaths began to pile up, the wildfire finished what the second virus had started. Think about it for a moment. In the early days of the outbreak, before people even understood what was happening, bodies were already filling hospital beds. Entire classrooms were empty. People were coughing, feverish, their lungs collapsing under the weight of something invisible. But when they died, their suffering did not end. The wildfire inside their bodies woke up and they returned, not as patients, not as survivors, but as predators. It almost seems too cruel to be true. A double infection working hand in hand. One to weaken and kill, the other to reanimate. Together they created a storm no government, no army, and no society could ever withstand. And yet the show never directly explains it. It is there in the background, waiting for those who notice the patterns. Those who ask the questions no one else dares to. So I will ask you this. If there truly was a second virus, one that the wildfire was waiting for, how early did it start? And more importantly, how many people died of this hidden plague before anyone even saw a single walker? In order to understand this second virus, we first need to go back and look at the wildfire itself, how it worked, where it came from, and why it might not have been the only monster inside us. Before we can uncover the truth of a second infection, we need to understand the first one, the wildfire virus. It was not born in some crumbling American city. It was not an accident inside a single laboratory. In fact, according to scattered fragments of dialogue in The Walking Dead, the virus was traced back to France in 2010. No one knew how it escaped, but by the time it was discovered, it was already everywhere. The horrifying part is that wildfire does not need to spread in the way people expect. It does not move like a regular illness, passed by air or blood alone. It is already inside every living person. From the moment of its appearance, humanity was doomed, because every single survivor carried the infection inside their body. It stayed quiet, invisible, and harmless until the host died. That is when the nightmare began. The moment a person's biological functions stopped, the wildfire activated. Nerves reconnected, the brain reignited in strange and broken ways, and the corpse reanimated with a single purpose: to consume the living. Unlike most diseases, the wildfire virus had no cure, no treatment, and no weakness. It could not be vaccinated against, because everyone already had it. It could not be destroyed, because it did not need to move between hosts. It only needed death. The terrifying efficiency of wildfire is why the apocalypse spread so quickly. It did not matter if you were bitten or not. As soon as your life ended, you rose again. A car crash, a heart attack, even natural causes, each became another spark in an endless fire. The first waves of walkers were not created by attacks. They were created by ordinary tragedies: a grandmother passing away in her sleep, a man collapsing in his kitchen, a child falling ill, each one returning as something unrecognizable. But this is where the mystery begins. In those first days, death seemed to arrive far too often. Too many bodies, too many unexplained fevers, too many children missing from classrooms, and too many patients overwhelming hospitals. The wildfire was always waiting, but something else was killing people faster than chance or statistics could explain. If wildfire was already inside us, why were so many people dying so suddenly before the first waves of walkers appeared? Could it be that another virus had already begun the countdown to the end of the world? Every apocalypse has a beginning, but this one did not start with a scream. It started with silence. Long before the world collapsed, there were strange patterns hiding in plain sight. Small clusters of illness, sudden deaths, empty hospital corridors filled with people who should not have been there. If you look closely at the timeline, the signs were everywhere, but no one understood what they meant. In Fear the Walking Dead, there is a moment that most viewers forget. A teacher looks out at a nearly empty school bus and wonders where all the students have gone. The explanation given is simple. They were sick with the flu. At first it seems harmless, almost boring. Children get sick all the time. But in the context of the wildfire virus, that excuse begins to sound very different. These were not ordinary colds. These were the first waves of something much darker. Hospitals started reporting a rise in patients with high fever, uncontrollable coughing, and sudden respiratory failure. They were not bitten. They had no injuries. But still they were dying. Some physicians blamed poor living conditions. Others whispered about contaminated livestock. But no one could agree on the source. Every hour brought more patients and every bed was full. Then came the panic. Because once those patients died, they did not stay dead. Imagine being a nurse in those first days. You watch a man in his 40s collapse, his lungs filling with fluid, his face pale with fever. He dies within hours. You turn your back for a moment, and then you hear the sound of movement. The same man is standing, his eyes glazed, his body moving with something unnatural. One sickness creates the corpse. The wildfire brings it back. The pattern kept repeating. Entire families fell ill. Whole classrooms were emptied overnight. People who should have survived a normal flu were dying at alarming rates. And still officials said nothing. Perhaps they thought it was just another seasonal outbreak. Perhaps they hoped the panic would fade. But the numbers kept rising, and with each death the wildfire gained another soldier. If this illness truly existed alongside wildfire, what was it? A simple flu or something designed to fail us when we needed strength the most? To answer that, we need to examine the mysterious sickness that spread like smoke through the world, the hidden flu. The Walking Dead showed us a world drowned in death, but it never truly focused on the sickness that was already spreading long before walkers filled the streets. Hidden behind the chaos of the wildfire virus, there was another shadow. People called it influenza, or simply the flu, but this explanation was far too weak for what was actually happening. Think back to the prison arc in Season 4. A simple flu outbreak was enough to wipe out more than half of the survivors living there. These were not weak, fragile patients. These were hardened men and women who had already survived years of the apocalypse. Yet one infection spread like a blade in the dark and brought them to their knees. If a flu could destroy a group of survivors this late in the story, imagine what it could have done at the very beginning. In Los Angeles, doctors and nurses were overwhelmed by patients with flu-like symptoms. They were not victims of walker attacks. They had no bite marks, no scratches. They were simply sick, their lungs breaking down, their fevers climbing until their bodies could not endure it. The show hints at this through small details. Children staying home from school, patients crowding the emergency rooms, even survivors mentioning how many people were already coughing before the panic began. What made this flu so dangerous was not just its strength, but its timing. It came at the exact moment when humanity needed to be healthy, alert, and prepared. Instead, it drained communities of their energy. It killed mothers, fathers, and children who might have resisted the wildfire's spread. The flu weakened entire towns before a single walker even appeared. And when those victims finally died, the wildfire waiting inside them turned every loss into another monster. Some survivors believed the flu was natural. Others whispered about experiments, failed cures, or even a second weapon designed to push humanity over the edge. No answer was ever given, and perhaps that is the most terrifying part. Because if this hidden flu was not natural, then someone wanted it to spread. But whispers and rumors are not enough. If a second virus really existed, there must be evidence buried in the story. Strange details that prove it was not just wildfire that ended the world. And when we look closely, that evidence is there waiting to be uncovered. Fear the Walking Dead was not just a spin-off. It was the missing puzzle piece, showing us the earliest days of the outbreak. And if you pay attention, the show quietly revealed clues that something more than wildfire was at work. From the very first season, Los Angeles hospitals were drowning with patients long before the dead started walking. These weren't victims of violence. They weren't bitten and they weren't scratched. They were sick. Entire wards were filled with coughing, feverish patients. Nurses whispered about an illness spreading faster than they could track. Families were warned to stay home, yet no one truly understood what was happening. In one chilling moment, Madison's school is closed early, after several students fall sick with flu-like symptoms. This isn't a random plot device, it's a seed, a subtle way of showing that society was already breaking down because of disease, not walkers. Later, as chaos spreads, the military begins setting up quarantine zones. But instead of focusing on walker bites, they start rounding up sick people. Anyone coughing, sweating, or looking weak was taken away, never to be seen again. Why was the military so afraid of the sick? If wildfire was already unstoppable and hidden in everyone, then flu symptoms shouldn't matter. And yet the show makes it clear. Those who looked sick were treated like carriers. Soldiers moved in with urgency, as if they knew something the public didn't. Another clue comes from the hospital scenes in Season 1. Doctors discuss patients whose organs are failing without explanation. Some simply stop breathing. No trauma, no injuries, just collapse. These deaths don't fit the wildfire model. They sound more like something else, something spreading through air, water, or contact. And it wasn't just Los Angeles. Radio chatter mentioned outbreaks in other cities across the US before walkers ever reached them. Fear the Walking Dead never calls it a second virus, but the evidence is there for anyone willing to look. It was as if the writers wanted us to notice that wildfire wasn't the only thing killing people. But the biggest proof doesn't come from fear alone. It comes from how survivors behaved later in The Walking Dead itself. Because even years into the apocalypse, they still feared an illness that wildfire alone couldn't explain. If wildfire alone was the cause, then survivors should have adjusted quickly. The rule would be simple. Do not get bitten, and when someone dies, they will turn. Straightforward, predictable. But throughout The Walking Dead, characters behaved as if something else was still lurking in the shadows. Take the prison arc in Season 4. Rick and his group were safe behind walls. Food was being grown, and for once they weren't directly threatened by walkers. And yet, panic spread when members of the group started coughing blood. They weren't bitten. They weren't scratched. Still, fear gripped the entire community. People were quarantined, separated, treated like lepers. If wildfire was all they needed to fear, then why the hysteria? They already knew everyone was infected, and dying meant turning. But this wasn't about turning. It was about dying from sickness, dying from something that felt contagious. And the way the group reacted shows that deep down, they knew wildfire wasn't the full story. Look also at Alexandria. When survivors from the outside tried to join the community, they were watched carefully, examined, and sometimes even rejected for appearing ill. Again, bites weren't the concern. It was weakness, fever, cough. It was the fear that letting one sick person in could doom everyone else. Even the CDC in Season 1 gave us a warning. Dr. Jenner explained that the pathogen was already inside every living person, dormant until death. But the way he hesitated, the way he looked broken, it felt like he wasn't telling the full truth. It's as if he knew there was more. Something spreading in real time, not just lying dormant. And remember how every group, whether it was Woodbury, Hilltop, or the Commonwealth, had entire systems built to keep the sick away. Not just the bitten, but the sick. They didn't treat illness as harmless or expected. They treated it like a threat, like something contagious that wildfire alone could not explain. It's this behavior, repeated across seasons and across different communities, that proves survivors were afraid of more than just bites. They were afraid of what they couldn't see, of what might be spreading silently, without blood or teeth. And if you think this hidden virus was just fan speculation, you're wrong. Because there are real-world inspirations behind The Walking Dead that make the second virus theory disturbingly possible. The Walking Dead has always felt closer to reality than most zombie stories. That is because its writers drew inspiration from real science, viruses, pandemics, and the way societies crumble when fear spreads faster than disease. The second virus theory does not just fit the show, It mirrors what has already happened in our own world. Think back to the 1918 Spanish flu. Entire towns were wiped out in weeks, not by war, not by famine, but by a sickness that seemed unstoppable. It killed the young and the strong as easily as the weak. Doctors wore crude masks, bodies piled in the streets, and survivors whispered about a curse that struck without warning. Sound familiar? That same imagery reappears in The Walking Dead, only with walkers lurking outside the gates. More recently, the global pandemic we all lived through showed how fragile our systems truly are. The virus itself was deadly, but fear, misinformation, and panic created even more destruction. Shelves went empty. Hospitals collapsed. Neighbors turned on each other. If one virus could bring the modern world to its knees in real life, why would we believe that in the Walking Dead universe, a single bite-based infection caused everything? Virologists also warn us about co-infections. A person with one virus becomes more vulnerable to another, and when two pathogens mix, they can evolve into something worse. History proves this. Diseases have overlapped before. Plague mixed with famine, influenza with pneumonia, and the result was devastation. That concept of overlapping pathogens is exactly what the second virus theory suggests. Wildfire may have been universal, but another sickness was circulating, speeding up collapse, making survival nearly impossible. The scariest part? Most people would not even realize they were facing two enemies at once. They would blame every cough, every fever, every unexplained death on the obvious threat, never realizing the invisible one was the true killer. As that is exactly how The Walking Dead plays out. Survivors never stopped to question why things spiraled so fast. They were too busy running. The showrunners never had to spell it out. They just needed to mirror real-world history, because history is already horrifying. Epidemics always come in waves, and often the second wave is far worse than the first. But the most chilling clue does not come from history. It comes from the government inside the Walking Dead universe, the people who knew the truth, and decided to hide it. If there truly was a second virus, then the most terrifying question is this: who knew about it and why did they stay silent? The answer, like most horrors, points straight to the government. In the Walking Dead universe, we already saw glimpses of their knowledge. The CDC in Season 1 confirmed the wildfire infection, but Dr. Jenner's hesitation told us there was more he could not say. Why would a man at the end of the world with nothing left to lose choose his words so carefully? Perhaps because he had sworn to secrecy. Perhaps because some truths were too dangerous to reveal. Then there is the silence of the military. At the outbreak's peak, soldiers set up quarantines, built camps, and transported civilians to safe zones. But how many of those zones ever survived? Most collapsed in weeks, not because of overwhelming walker attacks, but because of disease ripping through the camps. Families who were not bitten still died in the night. Entire platoons fell ill without a single scratch. And yet official reports always described these losses as walker-related. Was this incompetence or a cover-up? Fear is easier to control when it has one name. If the public believed there was a single bite-based infection, they could follow simple rules: avoid the dead, destroy the infected. But if word had spread that an invisible sickness was also in the air, one that could strike without contact, panic would have torn society apart even faster. Martial law would have failed overnight. People would not just fear the dead, they would fear each other. And maybe that is why the truth was buried. The government did not want a collapse of order. They did not want neighbors killing neighbors at the first sneeze. They did not want the last survivors to lose all hope. So they gave the public half the truth. They taught them to fear the obvious threat, while quietly studying the hidden one. It is not hard to imagine underground labs still running when the world was already burning. Scientists experimenting on the sick, collecting samples, desperate to understand what wildfire had merged with. Perhaps those experiments created more questions than answers. Perhaps the knowledge of a second virus was locked away in classified files that no survivor would ever see. And yet, fragments of that truth leaked through. Not from the government, but from the survivors themselves, the ones who lived to tell the stories that no one wanted to hear. When governments fall silent, the truth has a way of crawling out through the mouths of survivors. Their stories are fragmented, half remembered and sometimes dismissed as hysteria. But when enough people repeat the same nightmare, you begin to wonder if it is not coincidence at all. There is the account of a nurse in Los Angeles who wrote in her journal during the first week of the outbreak. She described how patients began arriving at her hospital, coughing violently, their skin pale and fevered. None of them had bite marks. None of them had been attacked. Yet within 24 hours, half of her ward had died. And by morning she swore she heard the sound of nails scratching against the walls as the dead returned. Her final entry ended mid-sentence, as if the pen was torn from her hand. The journal was later found spattered with dried blood. Then there is the testimony of a father in Chicago. He claimed his daughter came home from school with a runny nose and a sore throat. He tucked her into bed, reassuring her that it was just the flu. The next night she stopped breathing. By dawn she stood in the doorway of his room, her eyes cloudy, her lips purple, her jaw moving without words. He said it was not the bite that killed his family. It was the sickness that took his little girl first. Even in the military, soldiers whispered about what they saw. One anonymous transmission from a radio operator mentioned entire barracks falling ill after a single soldier sneezed during roll call. Within days, the camp was overrun. Yet in the official logs, the outbreak was attributed to Walker infiltration. How convenient, and then, scattered across forums, message boards, and later the desperate broadcasts of ham radios, came the same chilling refrain: not everyone who died was bitten. It was said so often, in so many places, by so many voices, that ignoring it became almost impossible. Of course, skeptics will say fear makes people exaggerate. They will argue that these survivors were confused, traumatized, desperate to explain tragedy with conspiracy. But the more you listen, the harder it is to dismiss the pattern. These stories do not come from one place or one time or one type of survivor. They come from everywhere. From mothers, soldiers, children, doctors, from people who had nothing to gain by lying and everything to lose by being believed. And maybe the most unsettling part of all is that these testimonies are not written in the past tense. In scattered journals, lost tapes, and hidden recordings, survivors still speak of a sickness that outlived them all. But if the wildfire virus was not acting alone, then the real question becomes, what happens when two infections begin to merge inside the same host? The most terrifying possibility is not that two viruses existed at the same time. It is what happens when they begin to overlap. Because if the wildfire virus reanimates the dead and the second virus weakens the living, then what would emerge from a body carrying both? Imagine it. A host stricken by fever, lungs rattling, blood thick with influenza. Their immune system collapses, their body breaks down while still alive. And then, as death claims them, the wildfire virus awakens. But the corpse it reanimates is not a healthy body. It is one already mutated, already reshaped by another infection. The result would not be the shambling, predictable walkers that survivors came to know. It would be something else. A hybrid. Whispers tell of the fast ones seen in the earliest days, creatures that sprinted rather than staggered. Some dismissed these as hallucinations born from panic. Others swore they were real, and they moved with the rage of fever still burning in their ruined muscles. There are stories of the breathers, corpses that continued to cough and wheeze even after death, expelling clouds of something unseen with every staggered step. Survivors claimed that just being near them was enough to fall sick. The theory is simple and horrifying. The second virus did not just weaken humanity for the wildfire virus to finish. It fused with it, creating variations that were never meant to exist, variations that the show never focused on, but which were hinted at in shadows, in background details, in stories cut short. And maybe that is why the fall of civilization seemed so sudden, so absolute. It was not just the walking dead overwhelming the living. It was a sickness spreading among those still breathing, a sickness that left bodies ripe for reanimation. Humanity was not simply eaten alive. It was hollowed out from within. Of course, the series never confirmed this. Maybe it never will. But sometimes, what is left unsaid is more terrifying than what is shown. And when you piece together the fragments, the fevers, the unbitten corpses, the coughing survivors who never woke up, It begins to paint a picture far darker than anything the screen dared reveal. Perhaps the greatest horror of The Walking Dead is not the wildfire virus at all. Perhaps it is the second virus, silent and unseen, lurking behind every cough, every sneeze, every ordinary death. And if that is true, then surviving the apocalypse was never about avoiding bites. It was about avoiding each other. So the question remains, was the second virus real or just a shadow born from fear? Maybe we will never know. But if it was real, then it was not the undead that ended humanity. It was us, breathing carriers of a sickness we could never see.